Good evening. This is my nonverbal communication activity. I was able to successfully obtain all three situations and be able to not interact but kind of watch and witness their nonverbal communications. I will say that this was a very interesting study because I saw probably a lot more of the communication than the people who were actually talking to them because I was watching for it. And I think that that taught me to watch more closely for those nonverbal cues when I get the opportunities to. Situation one, I actually chose to watch my manager. We work very, very closely together. We've kind of developed the team, so I wouldn't say that we're friends, but I would say that I probably know her better than some of my friends. Um, I watched her lead a meeting, so how she engaged the entire room, how she presented herself, her talk, her tone of voice. She was very in charge of the situation. She uses a lot of hand gestures to reinforce, a lot of nodding, a lot of direct communication where she makes eye contact with somebody and motions to them, and then makes this motion where she brings it in and then acknowledges a yes, that's in line with what we were talking about. She had a lot of nonverbal cues, almost more than I would say her words were, because her words would be very short. Correct. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. And then she would lead the next question to the team, have the team answer. And as people would answer, and that would be her, you're correct. So she used a lot of reinforcing language, a lot of responsive language with her body tone, and a lot of repeating. So when she would say correct, her head would nod and her hand would go correct. If something wasn't right, she would say no, but her head would kind of lean to one side, her hand would come up, and then she would correct you and go back into that correct mode. So it was kind of amusing. I got my notes by using the notebook I typically use for team meetings and just flipping the page. So she didn't realize I was studying her, even though we were within 4 feet of each other. Very interesting to watch her interact with the entire team, not just pay attention to what her words were, but what her language was saying as well. I feel like I got more out of that team meeting than I normally do because I was really able to understand what she was really supportive of, what she was less supportive of. And I think I'll probably continue watching her so closely during team meetings to see which direction she's really wanting the team to go to. Situation two, that was fun. I was watching the facial expressions of a grandmother who was having lunch with a granddaughter at a restaurant, and grandma wasn't happy at all. When she said no, which I could see the word no, but I couldn't hear them. I was about 4 tables away. She would look down and look and shake her head no. When her granddaughter was talking to her, she would look away. Her eyes would look out the window. She would face her, but her eyes were everywhere except her brow was permanently furrowed. A lot of head shaking, a lot of wincing with her face. She really didn't like whatever it was that she was hearing. Um, I did get caught on that one. The granddaughter eventually approached me and asked if I had a problem. Apparently, I had been watching a little too closely to the body language, and she felt offensive. So I explained that I was just watching. There was no names, no comments, no who. There was no descriptives, just the facial expressions of her grandmother in the conversation. And it got awkward, but she left. I will say that I left shortly thereafter, but it was a fun little experiment to kind of see and then also interact with her and kind of get a feel for what her vibe was and how she was projecting herself and portraying herself to me outside of the conversation she was having with her grandmother. The third experiment, I actually went downstairs to a lobby and I was watching the interaction of a client with one of the representatives. I don't know the client, complete stranger to me. And I happened to catch a really interesting moment. There was two people sitting there, and one I could just barely see like the shoulder of. There was a wall and a door kind of hiding the rest of them. I don't even know if it was a man or a woman. And then there was a gentleman sitting next to her that had bird's eye view, like perfect view of this guy. So I decided I'm going to watch him and his body language and his gestures to see what he does. He didn't actually gesture at all in the way that I do. I talk with my hands a lot. I'm a lot like my manager in that. Not so much. This guy used almost none, which I guess supports the text saying that women use a lot more nonverbal gestures and a lot more nonverbal cues than men do. Because the two women that I watched, I was able to very easily pick up, and this guy, his was more total body language and posture. So when my coworker left the room to go get some papers, the guy immediately turned his body away, put his arm up, faced the wall, crossed his leg away from my coworker, and broke out his phone. And we're talking about like a 50, 60-year-old gentleman. He broke out his phone, and by his hand gestures, it was very clear that he was playing a game. And like completely blocked off my coworker. His leg was crossed the other direction. He was facing a wall. He wasn't even facing the direction that my coworker normally sits in. So I thought, okay, maybe this is a temporary break. Maybe he's just doing something he thinks my coworker is going to be gone longer than he will be. And I don't think that was the case. My coworker came back into the room. The gentleman never moved his body back into alignment with my coworker. He didn't acknowledge my coworker walking back into the room. He stayed in that position. He seemed to answer out of the side of his mouth, not making direct eye contact, not facing and not respecting David in the way of giving him his attention. He kept his arm up as a divider and a barrier between the two of them. He kept his legs crossed, facing out like he couldn't wait to get away. And he stayed buried in his phone. He stayed in his phone with that body language facing outside of my coworker. And I watched for longer than 3 minutes. I probably stayed for about 6 minutes till the end of my lunch shift. He barely interacted at all. It was like he didn't want to be there. The body language is very clear that he was upset. And I kind of actually really like to know what was going on, because that wasn't, I think, body language that somebody who is at a financial institution should have. It was really interesting to watch. When I left, he was still on his phone. He was still ignoring my coworker, and he was still, I guess, just it seemed to be completely not communicating at all. It was almost like, instead of seeing the gestures and the nonverbal communication of what he was trying to say, I was watching everything he was trying not to say. So overall, very interesting experience, like an interesting experiment, and I enjoyed it. I liked watching the people and kind of seeing what they were saying without saying anything. It was something I used to be, what I thought that I was good at, that today I learned a lot from. Thanks. Have a great night.